Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. Let's say a prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day that we can all be here to worship you in song and in prayer. Please be with Pastor Jesse as he has a wonderful sermon for all of us, and please keep us all safe today, and we love you, Jesus. Amen.
I have two music stands today. Move that right over there. How's it going, everyone? Good. I want to make a quick announcement real quick. As most of you know, we lost someone really close to us 2 weeks ago. And we are having the celebration of life for Dawn not tomorrow, but the coming Sunday, the 14th, at 1 o'clock p.m., and it's going to be at the Auburn Adventist Academy Church. And so we want to celebrate her life. She lived a really incredible life. We had some time of sharing over here after the service last week, and it was so incredible to hear how much of a difference she's made in so many different people's lives. So we're so grateful for her presence here with us all of these years. And so if you're interested in coming to that, it's going to be next Sunday, the 14th, at 1 o'clock p.m., the Auburn Academy Church. This week, we're starting something that I'm excited about, scared about, all sorts of different emotions. We're starting a series on mission. And what I mean by that is mission for here at North Hill. North Hill has been a church that has been around since, I think, 1988 is what we've talked about. And it's funny because even when I talk to some of the founders, they're still a little fuzzy on it. When the Spirit's really moving, you just, sometimes you forget. But you forget what happened, when it happened, all that. But this church has been around since 1988, and it's been an incredible place. I happened to come here as a kid. I don't know if you know that. I'm good friends with the Edstrom family and their son Eric, and so I would spend a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time sometimes at their house. And so I came here and known this church for longer than I've been the pastor of it. And it's been such a privilege to be part of it. And so I'm so grateful for all of the people who have been pillars in this church, people who have done so much more work than ever was called or asked of them. It's just been amazing to be part of this. And part of the reason that I get to be here and in this position, and I'm excited to be in this position, is because this church was not founded with the idea of, we're going to start this way and we're only going to be this way for the rest of time. This church was founded with the idea of, why not try stuff? Why not try new things? And so I'm so glad to be a part of that culture now, because it means that we get to be people who explore what it means to follow Jesus in our time. And with that comes this mission that we as Christians have, and that's that the gospel is to be spread to the entire world. At this church, what we hope to see, and we talked about this in December, is what we hope to see is for dead lives to be raised to new life in Jesus Christ. Paul talks about the fact that so many different, so many of our lives, we're living them, but we're not really living them, and the only way we find our life is if we lose it. And if we lose it, and then we're raised to new life in Jesus Christ, where he lives in us and through us, and as a result, the world around us is changed. Like, that's what we hope to see here. But that's what we hope to see. That's our vision. How do we accomplish that? What's our mission? What do we do? So if we want to see something, what do we do in order to be able to see that? And so that's what we're going to be talking about this week. And in the next 2 weeks, is we're going to be talking about our mission. And at this church, as we move into the future, we hope to be a relevant, disciple-making, and a multiplying church. And some of those words, I'm sure you have questions about and are trying to figure out, and that's okay. That's why we're talking about them. But relevancy is the first one that we're going to talk about today. I want to say, actually, let me just start here. How many of you ever went into a Blockbuster? Anybody? Blockbuster store, okay? That was a really cool place. I don't know if you remember, but you would go in there, and half the time you didn't come out with the movie you were hoping for because it was checked out already, right? It was already rented. The other times you would go in there and you were pretty sure what movie you wanted, and then you saw the cover to another movie and you're like, oh, this is interesting. I might get this. As a kid, this was my favorite part about it. I'd be like, Mom, can we go rent a movie? She's like, yes, but only one. That meant if I picked a second one and I really liked it, there was a 50-50 chance that I was getting both, okay? It was pretty awesome. I knew how to work the system. But you'd walk in there and there was these racks. I don't know if you remember this. There was these racks of just movies, especially the new arrivals. There would literally be from like this to all the way over here of just like 3 shelves of just the same movie over and over again for rent. And it was an awesome place, and I loved it, and especially because you go there, and then they were really smart, and they'd put all the candy right in front of the register, and so you get there, and you're like, but Mom, I need sugar to watch the movie, which is absolutely not true. But Blockbuster was a pretty awesome place. I don't know about you, but I loved it. But Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. If you don't know that, welcome to this world. It doesn't exist anymore. Actually, just down the road, there's a Hollywood video store. Have you guys seen that? If you drive down Meridian a little ways, there's over by the Safeway, there's a Hollywood video store that hasn't been rented out in I don't know how long. And they still won't rent, like the church that rents from us, they looked into that building. The guy's like, oh, I don't want to rent to you. I was like, dude, you need to rent to whoever is coming to you because that building is so specific. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. But like The reality is that Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. And part of the reason is because there was this thing called Netflix that showed up out of nowhere. Back in 2000, the creator of Netflix came to Blockbuster and said, hey, listen, we'll run your website and all that stuff. And so we'll merge with you, or you can buy us and we'll run your website and we'll do all that. Blockbuster said, that's stupid, and then went out of business. Because what Blockbuster forgot was that American culture is a culture of convenience, right? Like, we love convenience. There's literally something called a convenience store. And the whole point is that we were structured around convenience. At a certain point, instead of having like 80 different stores for different things, we're like, hey, let's have superstores. And then Fred Meyer came around, and like, you just get these crazy places where it's all about convenience. I want to go to the same place to get the same thing. That's our culture. But Blockbuster kind of thought that they had the monopoly or the idea or the way that it worked, right? When they were having so much success, they knew, like, we're onto something here. But what they failed to see is that something could be more convenient than them, right? And so Netflix comes around and they're like, hey, you can have all the convenience of this selection of movies and you don't have to leave your couch. Right? Actually, sorry, at the time, it was, you don't have to leave your driveway. You had to go put it in the mail. There was mail before. Yeah. But over time, it became, you don't even have to leave the safety and the comfort of your couch. Now, instead of having to go to the store to find a movie, I can literally go through, 83,000 different movies and still not find one to watch. Okay? That's where we're at now. Somehow, in this inconvenience in this world, somehow my wife and I can be in the same room and we have all of these choices of movies and you still can't find a one you both want to watch, okay? That's a tough one. One worth watching. Yeah, one worth watching, absolutely. And then on top of that, you can watch like a TV show and you don't have to like get up and change the DVD, as hard as that sounds. You don't have to get up and change. You can just literally watch it through for hours. And it's more convenient. And the problem was that Blockbuster thought that they had some sort of idea that was the most convenient, and then all of a sudden, 10 years after this talk between Netflix, and a beginning of Netflix and Blockbuster, 10 years later, Blockbuster is bankrupt and has become irrelevant in our society. We don't think about Blockbuster anymore. We laugh at it now. We kind of have like the nice memories of it, but it's irrelevant to our society. And the problem is that if Blockbuster has been irrelevant for like 10 years, the problem is that I think the church, Christianity, has been irrelevant for longer in our culture. Not that the message of Christianity is irrelevant, but rather that the way, the types of things that we're saying, the questions we're answering aren't the questions of our culture today. I read an article where there's this author, and he was an older guy, and he was like, so this is why it was really brutal. He goes, if the 1950s all of a sudden came back, most churches wouldn't have to do anything differently. I was like, oh, ouch, that's painful, right? That's painful. But that's a pretty tough look at where we're at today. And I've heard a lot of people say, and just before I go into this, I want to be really clear about my sermon today because it could be a lot of different things depending on how you hear it. But I want to say this is not about age. This is not about generations. I'm going to talk about both. But what we're talking about today, when we're talking about relevancy, is meaningfulness to every single person. Okay, I just want to make that very clear. So I don't want to make this about age. I don't want to make this about a separation of generations. But I'm going to talk about young adults real quick, if that's okay. I've heard a lot of people say things like, why are young adults leaving the church? And why are young adults leaving all of this? And then I hear answers which go something like this. Well, people just don't care about God like they used to. Or it's postmodernism. The culture has changed. There's all these different ideas of why all of a sudden young adults don't come to church. And here's my simple answer to why young adults don't come to church. Church isn't answering the questions that young adults are asking. Church is not relevant because it's not talking about the things that young adults care about. And that's a problem. I mean, as a young adult, there's different questions like, how do I navigate a culture where the American dream has completely shifted from having a house and a wife, 2 kids, 2.5 kids, a car. It's shifted from that to do whatever makes you happy. But now you have the added pressure of, well, what makes me happy? Because if I don't figure it out now, I'm going to be unhappy until I find it. And that's a weird thing to deal with. How do you navigate a culture where everything is relative, and yet at the same time, I know that everything can't be relative because then there's no absolutes and everything's up in the air, and yet how do I navigate that culture? How do I navigate a world where things like pornography or things like drugs and alcohol, but not just that, things like unhealthy behavioral practices, all this stuff is so much more accessible to me? How do I do that? How do I navigate a world where you ride the line between being yourself but also realizing that you're a super broken person? How do you think of getting married in a world where you've seen so many loveless marriages and really messed up divorces? How do you navigate all those questions? Those are questions that young adults are asking, and that's just the surface of stuff that young adults are asking. And so the problem is that I think a lot of Christianity is still living in this world where we're living in like this 20th century and earlier world where people just kind of believed in God because God was a thing that you believed in. And you come to church because church is a thing you do. But we don't live in that world, and we haven't lived in that world for 20 to 30 years, and yet I think Christianity in a lot of ways is still living as though it is that way. And so we do church in ways that is answering questions from decades ago instead of doing church in a way that makes sense to people in our current time. And I mean all people, young people, but people who are just part of our culture. We're still not doing it for people in our current time. And in essence, and this is the sad part, is like in essence, I think in so many ways we're Blockbuster, hoping that people will come and continue coming when something entirely different has happened in our culture. And that's a problem. And so we have to be relevant. And we don't have to be relevant just because we want to be like this young, hip, trendy place. That's not it. But because I firmly believe that the message of Jesus is the answer to the world's problems. And the problem is if we're not saying it in a way that the world hears it, it doesn't matter. You can go to another country and you can ask all the right questions to someone like, where's the bathroom? But if they're answering to you and they're saying it in a language you don't understand, it's of no help to you. And that's the same problem. We're answering questions in a language that doesn't make sense to the culture that we're in. And so that's a problem. So we have to be relevant because we want people to know Jesus. You know, I think that let me say it this way. At this point in this world, I don't want to hear stuff through a telegraph. I want to hear stuff through a text, right? The message can stay exactly the same. The gospel of Jesus Christ absolutely and will never change. But the way that we express it and the means in which we express it absolutely must. And so we have to be relevant because we want people to know Jesus. We desperately want people to know Jesus. And so I want to talk through this, and I want to talk about ways that we can be relevant. And I want to be careful about this because, again, I don't just mean like let's be modern. That isn't part of it. Yes, maybe it's a sub part of this, but it's not the point of this. Relevancy is not simply modern and culturally like we're at the cutting edge of things. Relevant is a lot more than that. And so I want to talk through this. Go to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, chapter 43. Isaiah 43, and we're going to be in verse 19, actually 16 through 19. Isaiah chapter 43, 16 through 19. And as we read this, I'm going to talk about the context in a second, but I want to read through this real quick. It says, "Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings forth chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Remember not the former things, not the things of old." Verse 19, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." This verse, the first section of that, I'm doing a new thing. It gets used in a lot of different contexts, often out of the context of Scripture. So let me just give it to you. There's this king of Israel. His name is Hezekiah. Hezekiah had an enemy in the nation of Assyria. So the king of Assyria shows up and he sends a messenger to Hezekiah and says, "Hey, listen, you're done. You're this is not going to go well for you. I'm about to come and destroy you." Hezekiah takes this to God and he says, "Listen, this is about to happen." God says, "Don't worry about it. Something else is going to happen in this king's land, and he's going to have to go and take care of it." So that happens. Except while the king of Assyria is on his way to take care of this other problem, he sends a letter. And he's like, "You didn't get out of this one. I'm coming back for you. You're still in a bad place. I'm still going to come back and destroy you." Hezekiah takes the letter. He goes before God and says, "Listen, this is what this king is saying." And God says, "Don't worry, I'm going to take care of you guys." And the whole of the Assyrian army is killed in its own camp. Just nobody knows how, just happened, right? Which is crazy. God takes care of them. But then immediately after this, Hezekiah, he gets sick. And he gets so sick that he believes he's going to die. And so he goes to God and he's like, "Listen, I'm going to die. You got to do something about this." And God says, "Yes, this is not the end of your days." And so Hezekiah gets better. But at that immediate moment, as he gets better, these envoys come from the nation, the empire of Babylon. And Babylon, the king, he had heard that Hezekiah was sick, and he's like, "I'm going to send some people to him." When they get there, Hezekiah is already better. But what Hezekiah is doing now, he's like in this mood. He's like, "I'm better, everything's great." He's real chipper, right? Chipper is a word my dad used to use. Wow, I feel really old. He's feeling really good about himself, and he goes and he shows the Babylonian envoys literally the entirety of his wealth, all of it, all of his storehouses, his valuable pieces, everything. He shows them everything. And God, afterwards, he's like, "Dude, what did you do? You're prideful in what you have. You act as though everything that you have has gotten you to this place. This pride is what is going to be the downfall of this nation. You guys don't think you need me. You think that everything that you have is good enough. This is going to be the downfall of this nation." And that's what God says to him. "Listen, in a couple generations, your descendants, not ancestors, descendants are going to be taken away into Babylon, the very nation you showed all this stuff to." But then God goes on a little bit of a rampage in a loving way. He says through the next, from chapter approximately 40 till the end of the book of Isaiah, God goes on a "I love you" rampage. He says, "Listen, you're going to go into captivity in Babylon, but I love you. I'm going to take care of you. Nothing is going to separate you from my love. I'm going to restore you to the land. I care about you. I'm not going to let you be extinguished from this world." He goes on this rampage, and in the middle of this, that's where he goes, "Hey, listen," and let me just read through this one more time. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings forth chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise, they are extinguished, quenched like a wick. Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Focus on that. Remember not the former things. Don't consider the things of old. Because in verse 19, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. I will make a path in the wilderness and ways in the desert. All of a sudden, he just says, I'm doing this new thing. He literally says, don't remember the things of old. Like, don't think about the things that happened in the past. And I don't think it's because he's like, forget the past. The past doesn't matter. It's useless. I don't think it's because of that. I think that the Israelites only remembered how they got to where they were, and then they stopped believing that God was going to continue to do things for them. So they remembered all the things God had done for them, but then they stopped believing in what God wanted to do. So they remembered these guys like Abraham and Jacob and all of these guys who were pillars of their faith. And they were like, wow, that was amazing. Those were really cool times. And then remember how God brought us to our land. Remember how He established us and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they're in this place living however they want to, doing whatever they feel like is right, simply because they have forgotten that God may want to continue to do things in their lives. I want my remembrance of the past to be the thing that propels me to trust in the present. I don't want it to become the problem that prevents me from believing in God today. I want my past to propel me into believing God in the present. The subtle thing about glorifying the past is that it often stops us from believing that the present or the future could be even better. I don't know about how many of you do this, but like I do this all the time. You think back to the glory days of whatever, right? Back when you were a kid, back when you started your job, back when your kids were younger and didn't talk back as much, whatever it was. And we go back to these moments that were a while ago and we think, wow, those were the good days. Those were amazing. God was doing all this stuff. God was present and all of this stuff. And we're like, well, why can't it be like that? But then what we forget is that in God, we don't have to go back to the beginning of these things in the past because every single day is a new beginning. Every single day is a new beginning. And as Christians, we can't be people who constantly point out the past and go back to the past and say, man, I wish it was like that. I remember that. I remember all of this stuff. We can't be people like that because we can't be people who go back to the 90s or even 2005 or 2011 or 2017 for that matter. Do you know why? Because God has stuff to do in 2018. I don't know about you, but God is a current God. That's why I say we have to be current, because God is doing new things. He's not a God who's just like, oh yeah, remember those things back then, and then just live on those for the rest of your life. God wants to do things in your life, in my life today. God has things to do in your life and in the families around you, in your neighbors, in this community that He could not have done in the past. And so He's doing stuff today. And that's why I want to be a person who's focused on the present, on the current things that God is doing. If God says He's doing new things, then I want to be aware of those new things. See, what happened was these people were so focused on Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all these guys that they forgot that, yes, they were going to go into exile, but God was like, listen, I'm going to bring you back, but I'm going to do something even greater. I'm going to send myself. I'm going to come to be with you. I'm going to come join you in your circumstance. I'm going to be part of your life. I'm going to experience the things that you experience. I'm going to come save you. Like, that's what I'm doing. But what's crazy is the Israelites miss it because they're constantly focused on what happened before. That's where they're focused. And this isn't just a generational thing. I'm just telling you, like, I get focused on stuff that happened a year and a half ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago in college. And that's stuff that I get focused on. So this isn't just a generational, like, oh, we're focused on like the 70s. This happens in my life today. And I'm recently coming out of a place where I realized, like, man, I haven't had faith that God was actually trying to do stuff like today, this hour, maybe, possibly, He's doing stuff right now. I'd forgotten, and that's the problem, is that the past is the past. But God is a current God. God currently loves you. Like, God didn't stop loving you last night after you messed up. God still currently loves you. God is currently fighting for you. He didn't stop fighting for you once you decided that, oh man, I just don't know if I can handle it. God is currently working in your life and in the lives of people around you. He is a current God. And that's what relevancy means, is that we are people, we are Christians, people who follow God, and we're focused on the present, what He's doing today. What He's doing in people's lives today. what he's doing in our world today. That's what being relevant means. Is when I look at someone, I'm not constantly thinking about the way they used to be. I'm thinking about what God is doing right now in their life today. But that brings me to my second point, and we find this in the book of Acts. So we want to be people who are current. To be relevant, we have to be current. We have to be people who are focused on the present, not the past. We go to Acts chapter 17. In Acts chapter 17, we find Paul. And Paul was this, I've been reading through the Bible in a year, and it's fun to read through Paul's books because I can barely keep up with him. This guy is like nuts. But Paul, in the book of Acts, he's in this place, and we'll start here in verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So Paul is in the city of Athens. There's idols everywhere, and he's kind of annoyed by it. His spirit is provoked within him, right? But it's the way that he reacts to his spirit being provoked that I think is really interesting. He goes out and he starts reasoning with all of these different philosophers, right? And so he goes out and he's talking with them and all this stuff. And in Athens, especially just in Greek culture, it was this thing where new ideas were always, it even says this in verse 21. It says, now the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. Right? So even the Bible's kind of making fun of them. Like Luke, the author of this, he's just like, yeah, that's all they ever did. So when they hear this stuff from Paul, they're like, interesting. Let's bring you over to a place called the Areopagus, which was this cliff in the middle of, in Athens that the city council or some of the wise people or these philosophers would meet and talk. So Paul gets there, and in verse 21 or 22 and 23 we see, so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. So then from the next part of this chapter, from 24 to through 31, Paul spends this time telling them now, having introduced this, he starts telling them, listen, there's a God, and I'm going to tell you about him. He created the world. He created you and me. He loves you. I lost my place entirely. He created the world, isn't bound by man, gives life to all men. In verse 28, then, he even quotes poets from Greek culture. And verse 28, you see there he quotes two of them, actually. And he uses all this stuff to tell the Athenian people about God. He uses Greek culture to talk about God, right? And I just got to say something. I've heard over and over again in my life, we lament culture. We lament culture. And again, this isn't generational. I've heard myself and my peers do it, that we lament the new things. We lament all of the new ways of thinking, the new technologies. We lament the way that people act nowadays. We lament all of these different things, and we're sad about them. We're frustrated. And I hear people complain about it all, but it's so funny because I'm just like, okay, let me just say this to everybody here. Complaining about culture isn't going to change culture, right? Nobody's like, well, Johnny said Instagram is a bad influence, therefore all of us are going to delete it. Like, that just doesn't happen. That's not the way this works. We lament culture over and over again, but I think there's an even bigger reason to stop lamenting culture. Culture, every bit of it, is an opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. I don't know if you realize this, but there's this guy named Russell Brand. He's this British comedian. This guy is raunchy beyond anything you've ever heard. This guy, at least, he used to be on MTV and all this stuff. He was addicted to drugs, sex, alcohol, all of this stuff. He was married to a pop star, super famous. This guy has been a big deal. Recently, he found Jesus, and he's not your typical Christian. He talks about Jesus, he believes in Jesus, but he's not like, sitting in church like most of us would expect. But this guy, he did an interview, and I was reading through this, and he was talking about how every single person who's turning to alcohol, drugs, people who show up at the brothel, all of this stuff, every single person is looking for God. Every single person. Every single person is looking for God. And so I was talking with Matt, our worship leader, who is back there. I was talking with Matt on Wednesday as we were meeting, and I was telling him about this. And Matt goes, So whenever we discount culture, whenever we're like, well, that's stupid and that's silly and that's a bad way of thinking, whenever we discount culture, we're actually shutting ourselves off from the fact that God could be trying to work in people's lives through it. The reality is that when we complain about culture, we're actually shutting it off as an avenue through which the gospel can be preached. I don't know if you heard that. Whenever we discount, lament, get frustrated about culture, right, and we push it to the side, we say, that's stupid, that's dumb, it's just secular, all of this stuff, we actually prevent it from being something that in our minds we see that God could actually be using it to reach people. We don't lament culture because the gospel can be preached into it. In a culture where everything is relative, we preach the gospel of a God who said, I love you, and that is certain. I, in fact, came and died for you. That's how certain this is, and you have the assurity of salvation. Like, that's the God that we preach that gospel into the world, in a culture where we have social media and we're more connected and unconnected than we've ever been in the entirety of the human race, right? We preach the gospel of a God, of a personal God who decided he wanted to go beyond liking your status or commenting on it, and he actually wanted to come and be intimately involved in every aspect of your life. That's the gospel we preach in a culture where everyone feels the right to hate anyone who's in opposition to them, anyone who has the opposite opinion, whatever it is. We preach the gospel of a God who didn't hate you because you were in opposition to him, but in fact came closer and loved you even deeper and showed his love for us in the fact that Christ died for us while we were still sinners. Amen. This is the opportunity for the gospel. We can complain about it all we want to, fine. Even Paul, his spirit is provoked in him. It's totally fine to not like it. It's a problem when we start to make fun of and discount it as ways that people are searching for God. We're searching for all of these things. As Christians, we shouldn't make fun of it. We shouldn't lament it. I mean, I have conversations with people all the time of like, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of stuff. But even me, I'm having to shift my idea, my way of thinking into, this is an opportunity. This may be a setback for us as a society, but this is an opportunity for the gospel to be preached in ways that it's never been heard before. Into places it's never been heard before. I don't know about you guys, but I want to be opportunistic. We want to be current, but I want to be opportunistic. I want to utilize culture for the gospel. But the last thing and the biggest thing about being relevant is in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And this was our scripture today. Thank you, Denali. I know Denali didn't agree to do scripture. She just didn't say no. So thank you. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23. And this is Paul writing. And he says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I become as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I become as one under the law, though I'm not under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, though I'm not outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I become weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing." I went to school, or at high school, we had this, he was our vice principal at the time, and the guy, he was a nice guy. He was really boisterous, I think is the best way I could put it. He was very, very outspoken, very loud. He cared, but it was just a really interesting, I don't even know fully how to describe him. He had a way about him, though, where he wanted to make a difference in people's lives. But the way in which he did it was just really did not connect to the rest of us at school. One time at an assembly, he was talking about how the cafeteria was becoming too loud during meal times, right? Okay, it wasn't a big deal anyways, but he proceeded to try and get us to go along with this idea of being quieter by pulling this fact out of, I don't know to what depths he had to dig to find this fact or create, I don't know how he did it. He says, when there's loud noises, you don't digest very well. And we're all like, what? What are you talking about? And this is part of the problem, is because he wanted to make a difference in people's lives, but he wanted people to listen to what he was saying, but the biggest problem was that he wanted you to do what he wanted you to do. It wasn't so much about getting you to buy into it and understanding your life and understanding where you were coming from. He wanted you to do what he wanted you to do. And he was nice. He was a nice guy. He wasn't mean. It was just that's what he wanted to do. And so I'm just going to be real. He had next to zero influence in our lives as high school students. He just did. Because he was thinking about the way he wanted us to do it instead of the way that it would help us. And I think so often that the way we do church, the way we talk about God, the way that we seek to help our communities are more about us and what we prefer and the ways we prefer to help and the ways we prefer to say things than they are about the people that we're trying to talk to and help and get a message across to. See, the biggest part about being relevant is being meaningful. The only way that you have relevant influence in someone's life is if you are saying meaningful things to them. How many of you guys are like, I love meetings? Not many of us, because 80% of the content of most meetings is like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know who called this meeting. I barely even know who's leading this meeting. We're just here, right? And it's not helpful to you, but the places you want to be are the places that make a difference in your life. And so for us to be relevant is for us to be meaningful, for us to actually seek to understand the other person before we think about ourselves and the way we want to get a message across, right? The problem is that, as I said at the beginning, if young adults are asking different questions, but we keep answering these other questions, if young adults are asking questions about how they deal with culture today, and I'm still always talking about the fact that when I was a kid, everything was legalistic, right? It doesn't match up. It doesn't make sense. My life, my experience growing up in church was a little bit legalistic, right? But if I'm talking to someone who didn't have that experience, it doesn't make sense to talk about it. And that's what we do, though, is in church, our experience is the way that we filter everything. But we have to understand that we have to be meaningful to people. And to be meaningful to people is to look at them and how they perceive the world and how the questions they're asking. You want to know the most simple way you can form a meaningful relationship with someone? Just ask someone out to coffee, lunch, dinner, whatever it is, and just ask questions, and don't go into sharing mode every 4 seconds, right? The people that have the most influence in my life are people who have heard me and then have told me to do hard things, right? Can I say that real quick? I'm just going to say this about culture, that there's a kind of an idea that, especially for young adults, that we need safe spaces and protected places, right? That's not the case. In fact, I've heard more young adults than ever say, I want to be challenged. I want to grow spiritually. I want to know. I don't have anyone who's doing it. If you want to have influence in a young person's life, just ask them out to lunch. Say, hey, how's life going? What's life like out of college? What is it like to be an adult now? What are questions that you just are struggling with in this culture? How's marriage going? How's being a parent going? You ask those types of questions, and all of a sudden you start to gain influence into someone's life, right? Because we're not just talking about ourselves and just talking about Jesus. Because guess what? Jesus cares about all that stuff. Jesus doesn't just care about the fact that you know a bunch of scripture. Jesus cares about your life and everything that's in it. So we need to also care. So that's why Paul, he says, for though I am free from all, here in 1 Corinthians 9, chapter 9, 19 through 23. There we go. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all that I might win more of them. To the Jews I become as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I become as one under the law, even though I'm not under the law, that I might win those under the law. And he goes on, I become like a Gentile for the Gentiles. I become like this because Paul is thinking through their eyes so that he might actually speak meaningful things into their life. And so what we have to do as Christians is we have to think about them before we think about us. And I don't mean them outside the church. I mean this as a whole. When I say them, I mean anyone other than us. We have to think about them before I think about me. Because when I do that, now I'm starting to actually filter their experience through their eyes, not through mine. I'm starting to be able to say things and ask questions and speak meaningful things into their life, as opposed to just saying a bunch of stuff that doesn't have any correlation to things they're going through. So church, if we're going to be a relevant church, we have to be current. And sure, I guess that means modern in some ways, but what it means is we have to look for the things that God is doing now in people's lives, what He's seeking to do in the lives of our neighbors and the people at our work. We have to be current. Look at the current things. But then more than that, we have to be opportunistic. We don't lament culture because we know that it's the opportunity for the gospel. The opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And last, we have to be meaningful. We seek for their perspective and we understand life through their eyes as opposed to just through mine. You know why Jesus became so alive to me? Because in Hebrews chapter 4, it says that we have a God who can sympathize with our weaknesses, for He's tempted in every way as we are. What? Like a God who would understand my experience, who could have come down from heaven and been like, well, this is what you need to be doing, and this is why you ain't doing it, and this is how you change. He didn't do that. He came and sought to be part of my experience. God is relevant to me because He sought to be relevant to me. He made an effort to be meaningful to my life. And that's why I love Jesus. Because I know that He's not separate, far away, just kind of talking His own language. But He's made every single effort that He could to be relevant to my life. The gospel of Jesus Christ is as simple as this. Jesus loves you. He loved you so much. He came down to this earth, experienced the things you experienced. He was killed by us, yet He rose victorious over every single death. Now we live united with Him in a new life, a new heart, a new creation. And that's relevant to every season, every single life, every single situation. Amen. Church, if you believe that, let me say that one more time. The gospel of Jesus Christ is relevant to every life, every situation, every season, and every circumstance. And I want to say it in a way that people hear it. So that's why we seek to be a relevant church. Let's pray. Lord, I'm so grateful that You didn't just seek to be this God that was far away, who decided that He was just going to do things His own way. But Lord, in our failing, in our messed up places, in all of our brokenness, You came down to it. And you decided to be part of it. And then You spoke into our lives. And Lord, You still seek to. You're not a God who's just of the past. You are a God who is presently seeking to do greater things than have ever been done. And that is mind-blowing to me. And yet, God, I still don't fully understand it. But I ask that You build in us a faith to believe that You are presently at work. That You have present things to do today, not just yesterday, not someday, long time in the future when You come back, but today. I want to believe that. But Lord, more than that, I want to be able to use this culture, to speak into this culture in ways that show that You love people. And Lord, last of all, I want to be meaningful to people. I want us at this church to be meaningful to people's lives. I want us to say things that matter. I want us to be able to see people's lives changed as a result of Your gospel. Thank You for everything that You have done in this church, Lord. But thank You even more so for what You're going to do. In Your name, amen.
Jesus, for righteousness.
have been made strong in your love, that we are not the broken and pitiful people we often think we are, Lord, but we are made strong. We are your sons and daughters. And I'm so grateful for you, God. God, we walk into these new times, and honestly, we're unprepared, and we have no idea what we're doing. But we also believe that you are a God who has seen the end from the beginning, and so we know that you are already in the know of what's going on in this culture, what's going on in this world, what's going on in people's lives around us, and so we have no worries about stepping forward in faith, believing that you are currently doing things, believing that you have opportunities for us to share the gospel of your love into this world, and more so, God, that we could be meaningful, make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Thank you so much, Lord, and give us wisdom and discernment as we move forward as people, but also as we move forward as a church. Thank you, Lord, in your name. Amen. Happy Sabbath, everyone. If you want to talk, I would love to talk afterwards, but